In today's episode, we're going to talk about some of the studios we got into. Obviously, our name is JV Studios, and it wouldn't be what it is if we didn't have some studio stories to share. So without further ado, let's kind of piggyback to our first studio space. We rented, I think it was like maybe 680 square feet in the Bridgeport Art Center, which is in Bridgeport. Super cool building, super artsy and loft style. And it was the first move outside the studio in the parents' basement, makeshift, so-called. But John, yeah, walk us through that, that first moment of when we signed that lease. We left mom and dad's basement and we literally were like, we have an office now.
Mm-hmm. It was 2015, 2016. We decided, hey, it's time for us to get our first studio. So we went over to the Bridgeport Art Center and we checked out some spaces. We found a spot that worked the best for us. And we said, all right, this is time, Before we were just working in our parents' basement, and with one person, it's pretty easy, but with two people, it definitely changes the dynamic. So for us, we really wanted it to feel real. And so, what came out of it was, well, let's get a studio.
Yeah, and I'll never forget, one thing they don't tell you is, you get a studio space, you're paying a monthly overhead, and then you realize you need desk, you need chairs, you need maybe a mini fridge, you need a little area to hang out. There's things that all of a sudden now just come on your plate. So I know back in the day, we were like, oh my God, like the space is one cost, but you have to furnish this space. This is your office. So what did we do? Like we built 3 standing desks. I remember we went to Home Depot to try to save $1. We stained them, and those became our standing desks for like a while. Then we thrifted some furniture, and we kind of were just in this artist realm, like anything just to make it kind of feel comfy and to make it feel creative. We started hanging our bikes, and then we really hit a moment before we got an apartment in Bridgeport too. Mm-hmm. We started living in there. It was kind of intense because we were so sick of making the drive 35, 40 minutes a day just to come home late, go back there. So like, I'll never forget, we had false walls, yep, twin double air mattresses. And as crazy as it sounds, we would shower there. They have a utility sink, and we bring flip-flops, and we were kind of living the artist under the table, kind of living in there, sleeping there a few nights. I'll never forget, we went to the dollar store, and I bought all these
burritos,
chimichanga breakfast burritos, and that's what we would eat. Like we had a microwave toaster, and I would pop in this frozen burrito. You'd come in, I was like, hey, breakfast is ready. You would cut it on a paper plate, and we were just eating like garbage and just kind of living the rough
starving artist lifestyle.
Starving artist, truly. But hey, those moments those were great foundational moments for us. And I think, we really though, and I think in that moment though, like we didn't really have the brother business partner discipline, because there's moments we'd have to leave because I was like, it was too much time spending together. We would literally be at work together, talk all day, and then segueing into it, we got an apartment in Bridgeport. Can you kind of talk about that when we lived together and worked together, and some of those moments we had that were pretty,
Well, yeah, transitioning, when we said, okay, I think, obviously it's apparent that we need to be down here a lot. We're getting pretty busy. We're driving back and forth. We're living in this studio. We have no amenities. And we said, you know what? I think it's time for us to get an apartment. And so it was February 2017, and we were living with our parents still, but they went to Mexico. And while they were in Mexico, we found a spot. And so we just signed the lease on it. And by the time they got home, we were gone. We moved out. And they were cool with it. It wasn't like any bad blood or anything, but we decided, hey, it's time. And so we had our studio in the Bridgeport Art Center, and then we had an apartment. And that was the first time me and Vince really lived with each other outside of our parents' house, trying to figure it out. Who's cooking? Who's cleaning? We both were raised with it. So we both love to do it, And I remember there's a lot of, talking about, in our studio, it's one thing. Hey, we come to agreement on this. But when it comes to a lifestyle, this is where the brothers, relationship comes back in, because I'm a different person than Vince. He eats different foods than I do, especially at that time. He drinks different things than I drink. He cooks different. There's different, I like things clean. So it's like, but he also likes things clean. So it's like one of those things of like, okay, well now we're running this business, but now we have to figure out how the hell are we going to live with each other,
Yeah.
That was crazy.
I'll never forget those moments where we were living together, and then we'd get home, and I'd just be like kind of in your face, kind of like, and you'd had a long day. Maybe we got in an argument at work, or at the studio, and you're like, I'm just going for a bike ride, and you would just like leave for hours, and just like it was just like you had to leave my presence because it was just so much time, and we did not have that figured out. And I think we lasted 6 months.
We lasted 6 months, and then kind of, this, what happened was I'm Vince's older brother, and so of course I've lived on my own. I was in Galena for the whole a year doing my own thing. Just a different experience. Vince was fresh out of college, living that college life, and so there was just like a story that sticks with me was I remember we were slacklining at Northerly Island, and there was this moment where Vince just wanted to figure it out. He just had to figure it out. He wanted to do it on his own. He just got out of college. And so I remember you saying like, hey, you're not my dad, like I got to figure this out for myself. And I said, okay, that's fine. And then we decided to launch our wedding business, and it was hot in our apartment. We had no AC, and we launched our wedding business. And then, that night we had a couple cocktails and we wound up just brawling, like it was a straight up brawl, like Vince put me through a table. I smashed him up against the wall, broke some Christmas lights. We woke up the next morning. All these people are like, oh my God, congrats on the business. It was great. And then me and him were like, we got to figure this out. So I met, my now wife, which we could talk about, how we kind of met, we met our partners pretty much on the same day. And I think it was a universal thing because it was like, hey, this business is really important to you guys, but this brothership, you guys have to figure it out, And I think by, finding our counterbalance of finding the ladies in our life, it helped us kind of find our own individuality outside of this business. Like just because we're brothers in business, it doesn't mean we have to be the same person. And so, after 6 months, I moved out.
Yeah. And so then I ended up riding out the rest of the lease. And then over time, we had distance. So we would see each other at work only, and it kind of created a healthy boundary. I think that's when stuff really started getting strong. And so then what'd that leave us? That led us to another studio space.
Yeah.
We got out of that lease after, I think, a year. And we were looking for something else. We were doing some work with the PR company. And they had an office in River North. And at the time, I remember John and I were like, if you have an office in River North, you're successful, though. Like, you're in River North. That's like the mecca of Chicago, and people, that do business, they go there, right? That's what you do as a business. And so what did we do? We found out there was some available space to rent in the Boylston building right off Illinois Street.
Yep.
And
116 West Illinois Street.
Well, yeah, and so we ended up setting up an appointment, and so we went from the Bridgeport Arts Center to a little space in River North, and what we kind of transitioned was like we pretty much cut our space down to a third. So we probably had honestly 100, 200 square feet.
Yeah,
no windows, nowhere for storage for gear. We had these 2 desks, a small mini fridge, and it was honestly, we called it the closet.
Yeah.
We rented a closet, but in exchange at the time, we thought it was cool to have a River North address. We're like, people are going to see this and they're going to say, hey, you guys are legit. This is a great, let's hire them because they're in River North. And then we kind of learned the hard way that it really did not matter, and we were just unhappy.
Yeah, and so, back to the time number 2 when the hair got cut. And this actually, when we got the River North office, we were still living with each other because we would take the red line now every day down to Chicago, do our thing, deal with all that, get to work, not really have a comfortable work environment, go back home. And I think the hardest thing was, when we had shoots, because we had all the equipment stored in River North, but there was no parking. So we would go 7 a.m., 8 a.m., drive down, go to work. And mind you, we were brothers, so we stuck together in Chicago. And so it was like, all right, I'm going. And I'm like, wow, I need some more time. And it just caused conflicts. Like, hey, you're on your schedule, I'm on my schedule. You want to work now, I don't want to work, but I want you to be safe because you're my brother and I got to make sure, So we had that whole thing. But yeah, we were trying to fit the mold. And so there goes the hair. We both cut our hair again. We were trying to be these, Chicago people, you know, or like these like successful people. And to us at that time, success was having an office downtown and looking the part and doing that. But yeah, it just killed our spirit. It killed our soul. And we really didn't, we weren't being our authentic self.
Right. And yeah, I'll never forget that. I mean, we were so, I guess, caught up in the image of what is successful that we forgot, to just create from the heart. And I'll never forget that one day. And for those who've been following JV Studios, like we did a video where I just bought a Movi at the time, and we were in River North. It got delivered, and I was like, let's just go film something. Kind of did another thing.
Here it goes again.
Let's just go film something. And so John, being the musician, he actually had his guitar there at the office on like a hook or something. So I was like, let's just do an improv freestyle jam in like an alley, right?
Yeah.
And for those who followed us, you've probably seen the video. We recorded it, and it was like a Movi test. I was like, I just want to test this gimbal out. And at the time, they were like the new thing. And I said, all right, John, play this song, or let me just play, and I'm gonna walk backwards and just do like a backwards walking dolly shot. And then out of nowhere, this homeless guy comes up to a singer, and he's like, hey, can I get involved, and we're like, yeah, we had our reservations at first, then we kind of got to know him, and he was a good guy. And so he's like, all right, let's do this. And just impromptu, we did this filming in the alley, John walking back, and the song was called what, Better Say? Better Say Before I Leave. And it was like a made-up song on the spot, and then singer kind of came in and did more of the verse, and John was kind of doing the chorus. We posted that video, and I mean, we got thousands of reviews and over 100-something shares beyond our network. It was like one of those Chicago videos got spread. Everyone's like, oh, the message was so good. And I think me and John had that moment where like, that video was not successful because we had a studio in River North. We were in the back alley of the building. It's just nasty with garbage cans, but we were just creating from passion and heart. Mm-hmm. We looked at each other and we said, we got to get out of here.
We got to get out of here.
This isn't our place. And not that River North is bad, because, there are big businesses and people do it differently. But for John and I, it was time to go. And then that led us to Studio 3.
Studio 3, which was a 2,000 square foot studio in Pilsen, right on Cermak and Halstead. And, we kind of got a tip about this spot, and we said, you know what? Let's really get back into the arts, Guess what? Hair started growing back out. And so, yeah, we got a 2,000 square foot office. We invited, it was a lot. The cost was higher. Talking about furnishing it, we had to furnish it. Like, we had a kitchen, we had a bathroom. It was huge. We had a full equipment closet. We had backdrops, we had couches, we had projectors and plants and fish tanks. And then we had a music studio. And, for us, it was like, it was a little overwhelming, and again, though, it was good, inspired growth. We had shoots there, we had meetings there. I don't know, to pop it on you, like, what was your experience with that studio?
I'll never forget, like, when the woman was showing us the building spaces, and when we looked at it, we looked at each other, and yeah, it was definitely priced on the higher end from what we were paying in River North, because we obviously had a lot less space, but had a good location. We're like, wow, this space is big. And I think we were like, let's do it.
Yeah,
let's see if we can grow something. I'll never forget that picture we took of the gold vintage couch with me and you, and the place is just empty. I think at that moment, it was the right time to go into a big space, kind of get back into the creative, off the grid. No one really needs to be in your business, kind of like, let's just hunker down again. And it was cool. Like, we met some really cool contractors that have visited us there and are still some of our main contractors. Yeah. And then we started kind of leasing space because we realized, like, hey, we have a lot of space. We're not really using it all. And back in episode 1, when we met Scott Lynch, the producer, he was moving back to Chicago and got a hold of us. And when we're like, hey, dude, we have this big space. If you want to, kind of just pay in for like a month-to-month lease, like, we can totally accommodate. So then we kind of created this like hybrid environment. We're like, wow, this feels super real. And then we had a good buddy, Ricky Wolf, come on board. And then Brendan Cunningham, who kind of came in as like this intern, now has blossomed into like a JV legend, So we brought in a lot of people, our cousin Giovanni. But I think a challenge that we faced was like, okay, we have this super cool space. Our name's on the lease. But there's a lot of upkeep. So John, like, do you remember those moments? Like, we had Gio, our cousin, like, he was a kind of an assistant editor at the time, but when there wasn't editing to do, you kind of had to step in and be like, hey, we need to kind of get this place cleaned up.
Yeah, so a lot of and we went there more in towards the winter months, and so winter months business tends to slow down, and so we started just you know, it's like, okay, Gio, what are you doing today? And it's like, all right, well, let's build a ladder to get onto the top of the loft. Let's build out the equipment room. Okay, let's get rid of these desks. Let's build brand new ones. So it's like, you know, we not so much busy work, but it was like, okay, we have somebody here. And so instead of then focusing on growing our business, we started just focusing on cleaning the space and growing the space and maintaining the space. And now we're hosting so far events, and we're having huge loft parties. And it's like, wait a minute, time to refocus again, because we're losing our focus on growing the business. And so that was kind of a moment. And then to talk about the moving timeline now, at this point, I moved in with my now wife in Brookfield. And then a couple months later, we got an apartment in Bridgeport. So then I had my apartment, and I actually lived with Giovanni, my wife Cass, and then another friend of ours, Jess, who lives in Seattle now. But so I did that, and then Vince moved into an apartment by himself. Remember that?
Yeah, we just needed some space, you know, and it was cool to see it. But now what ended up turning into it was John and Gio. You guys were working a lot, living in the same spot, going to work. So I think in the end of that Pilsen space, like kind of things I took away was, I guess it was a big distraction. You know, I think it was from an outside looking in. It was like, man, these guys got a huge space. Yeah, we had a few loft parties. We did a few so far concerts, and all these people are like, man, what is this? And it really didn't like generate, like it was fun, and it was definitely like our time, and we were like in this building phase. But something that really hit us was, you know, we were distracted from the end goal, and that was really building JV. We were kind of people pleasing, to be honest. We wanted a nice looking desk, and then we went to IKEA, and we spent just, and so just to kind of like rewind everything, we went from a parent studio to like over this small space. And what you don't realize is like each space comes with a different side of overhead, and then you guess what? You have a bigger space, you have bigger shoes to fill. So now we're just spending money that we would never normally spend on the wrong things. Instead of investing in gear or better computers with faster, you know, speeds, we're buying furniture to please people that come in and say, "Oh, you have a cool studio." Yeah. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely moments like, you know, we would set the Slack line up and we'd blast music and edit, and then we'd hang out after. But it kind of turned into like this more of a hangout. And I think John and I, we had this moment where we looked at each other and we're like, this is just too much to manage, you know, like, do we really want this? And also the building kind of didn't feel safe. So let's hop on the JV train to the next space. So in this process, we're trying to get out of this lease, and they, you know, eventually I think at the time kind of gave in, but they were just kind of being sticklers on it, and we kind of fulfilled our time.
Yeah, we had one month left.
Yeah, so, you know, cost of doing business, right? We had to eat that month, and it was all good. We just got out of the lease, and we started journeying to the West Loop.
Yeah. So we said, okay, well, let's refocus. I think we cut our hair again, honestly. So yep. Or at least I did. I think you kept yours growing. And so, you know, I think we got caught up into like, what's this false image of success? And I think we fell into that trap. And so then, you know, I think we started figuring it out, and we decided, okay, let's now forget all this overhead, forget having to have all these people here, forget all these desks and things, and let's just downsize. And we moved into a 400 square foot box in a co-working space in the West Loop. And so they provided desks, they provided kitchen area, they provided everything. And here we are. Now we're riding our bikes to the West Loop doing our thing. We moved all the gear to Vince's house in Bridgeport. And so, you know, it was great. And for me, I like, as a producer and just an introverted extrovert, I love being around people. And so it was really nice in the beginning to be around, oh, look at all these other business owners. They've been here for so long. We could have these conversations. We come in, there's a barista. Let's have a little talk. Let's have these little happy hours, because being a business owner, you know, you're only surrounded by people you surround yourself with. So it was mostly me and Vince and our team, but now we're exposed to all these other people. We're networking, and, you know, we did get some projects out through that networking, you know, community. But yeah, I mean, how was that experience for you?
the co-working space we're talking about, it's a company called Spaces. They got really cool looking offices, very similar to like a WeWork setup.
They're
but
owned by Regis.
Regis, yeah. So you kind of get a membership. You can go all around the world if you have that and work. So it's definitely good for the remote worker. But I think for us, again, we kind of like went from like, it kind of felt like we got a lot of weight off our shoulder. Like I'm talking, we had huge tables, we had chairs, we had fridges, we had a makeshift kitchen, we had big mirrors and decor. Like we literally got rid of everything, sold it all as much as we could. We literally had a sale in our building. People would come in.
Oh, yeah.
We sold all our backdrops. You know, the only thing we really kept was our computers and our equipment. The bummer thing though was that, yeah, the equipment was at my apartment. So like the gear was in one spot and then the admin stuff was in another. And I'll just never forget, like in the beginning days, we were on that top floor and we were just like, it was, mind you, so we're used to kind of being in a studio loft space. There's some privacy. This place was all glass walls. So like you had your own intimate room. And so like there was a membership, right? So you can pay a certain amount of money to just have like the open common areas, or you can pay a little more and you get like your own key to door just so you can lock stuff and feel good. So we went that option. We went on the floor too. And at the time, this was a very new thing. So no one was really up there. There was like, we were like the third tenant to really rent on the second floor.
Yeah.
And they put us next to someone because the pricing was all structured. If you were in a corner with windows, it was like double the price. So we kind of went like a side alley route. Still great view, but not as like, I guess, good. And so they put us next to a gentleman, and it was just awkward. Like we'd be sitting there. I remember I'd look at Johnny, and there'd just be a guy like looking at us, and he'd think that we were looking at him. So he'd wave, and then we would wave. And so like, it was a very new environment. It definitely started to feel more real because we're like, wow, we're like in this cool, creative, but like very nice space.
Yeah.
But it still was just not, something wasn't clicking. And then eventually we moved downstairs on the main floor with a bigger space. And
You know, it's like we were coming to work to like talk to people, you know? So yeah, actually what happened was a huge company, I think it was actually Foot Locker, they bought out the entire top floor. And so they said, hey guys, we got to ship you downstairs. And so they kind of just like rooted us and we moved. And it was nice being downstairs, but a lot more people, a lot of foot traffic. We're right by the kitchen. You're hearing people talking. I remember this one time where we and Vince were just sitting there editing. And then this lady just comes out of nowhere and she just like smacks her face in her hands against our window or like our glass. And she's just staring at us. And we just stop and we're like in the middle of like a meeting or something. We just look at her and we're like, what are you doing? Like, we're trying to get some work done here, you know? And so then me and Vince are very friendly people. We're on the creative end in a corporate office. And so what happened was everyone just was gravitated to talk to us, you know? So they're on break. We come in maybe at 10 o'clock because, you know, we are doing our own thing. We're not on anyone else's schedule. And so by the time we get in, everyone's on lunch. 2 hours later, you know, we're finally out of this conversation. Then we're eating lunch and we're like, this isn't working.
Yeah.
Just not working.
yeah, I'll never forget that. And that was a moment too. And it's just other liberties like having a candle scent and lighting an incense was like frowned upon. So like our artists in us started dying again. And we're like, why does this keep happening? Right. So what did we do? And then also I'll never forget is, you know, something important when you are looking for a studio space. Obviously you need to think of if you are going to have clients or not in your space.
Yeah.
I'll never forget we had a client coming and it took them 45 minutes to find parking because in the West Loop, if you're from Chicago and if you're not in construction, you're not getting a parking spot. They're there by 4 a.m. They take every spot. So this gentleman literally told us, I will never come and visit you guys anymore because you're just in, and he wasn't from the city. So like normally you would take transit and CTA or bus or an Uber. This guy was a little more in the suburbs. So that was kind of like something we thought about. We're like, is this the right spot? We don't have our gear here. We have a lot of other business owners that are kind of, you know, always interested in what we're doing because we're kind of like this alternative creative business and like John said, a corporate environment. And, you know, was it healthy still? Like, were we still enjoying the work? And so what did we do? We got out of the lease again. And thankfully to John, you know, they understood it was one of those things. We felt again, intuition, it was time. And, we hopped back on, went back south, and we ended up back at the Bridgeport Art Center.
Yeah, so we came full circle. Yeah, that was pretty cool. We moved there. We got a 1,200 foot space for less cost than a 300-foot space. And so we're like, okay, I think this is it. But then went back to IKEA.
Yep.
We bought a bunch of new desks. We bought a bunch of new chairs. We bought whiteboards. We did all these things just trying to figure it out. And I think the biggest takeaway from all this, it's like, of course, your environment is super important for your growth. But if you're focused on if you're focused on your environment more than your actual growth, you got to reprioritize. You got to look at your goals and say, what am I doing here? Like, you could be investing all this time, from your house trying to build a business and doing all these networking, doing all your things. So I don't think it is about the actual space. It's just about having that focus and understanding. And even though it sounds like a crazy story, I'm sure a lot of business owners go through it of just trying to figure it out. It's the trials and errors of being an entrepreneur. And, it's like, without that, we wouldn't be where we are today, because we went through those hard moments and we went through and we got burned and we learned.
And there's something about, like, I remember even us, we're like, John, like, we can't get rid of the studio because, like, it's going to make us look like we failed. Like, it's going to make us, like, as a business, it's like, oh, you guys don't have a space anymore? Like, what happened? You guys got washed up. So I think we are so attached to going back to that image of what success was. And so we were kind of like afraid. And I remember within that Bridgeport space, so we come back after West Loop, we're in the big spot, 1,200 square feet. We had some people working there internally on both companies. And then we hit a moment where, like, this is now becoming too much. Again, a lot of foot traffic. People, it wasn't glass walls, but people knew where we were. So on their breaks, we were right by where all the painters, it was an artist building. They would wash their brushes and they would knock and they would just talk. Or someone would come in at a different time. And I really think we just were like, how can we simplify everything we're doing? Like, the studio's just consuming so much energy. And so then within the Bridgeport Arts Center, we got like that 600 square feet as just like me and you. Yeah. That's hunkered down. It was gear, couch, 2 desks, super small. We felt like back in our hole, and we're like, this is great. And then the pandemic hits. Yeah. Right. And I think it was kind of crazy timing of just kind of being ahead of the curve of, like, it wasn't full blown yet where COVID was like, everything was closed, because eventually the building we were renting from closed down. But me and John kind of had this knack where we're like, we kind of knew what was going to happen. And so we're like, we weren't happy in the small space coming back. And I think we, like, literally had 6 months left on our lease. Did, yeah. And we literally went to them, explained our situation, like, hey, it's just not working. Meanwhile, like, COVID was not big yet. So we were kind of like trying to get out of it without putting the excuse on it, because eventually that became the excuse for everyone and no one got out, because it was like, hey, sorry, everyone's getting affected by this. So we jumped on it real quick, and then we came to an agreement, right? 6 months left. We said, hey, we'll do our best to find another tenant. And then they had us pay like an additional 3 months to get out of the 6 month, just so they could take 3 months to find a new tenant. And of course, I'm sure they did within a day or two. But boom, COVID hits. I'm living in Brookfield now because I moved out of Bridgeport. You're living in Riverside. Yeah. And here we are working separate in our own apartments.
Yeah. And for me, it was actually the perfect timing, because my wife was pregnant. We were pregnant with our son, Jackson. And so, Vince was, going back to the studio, and it almost became like just an outlet for Vince. It really did, because the amount of time I was there was nil. I was like, hey, you know what? I'm realizing I'm becoming a dad. I need to be here to support my wife. We have a baby coming. I got to get this house ready. It's going to take so much more out of me to drive 45 minutes to sit in an office when I'm a producer, and I can just do all my work right here. And so I kind of, I moved my desk and I kind of put my own boundary up, and I think that really helped. And then, once, COVID hit, it was kind of just like we knew what we had to do. But I think COVID was kind of a thing that was like, hey, now you have no choice. Now it's really time. Like, we're putting this on everyone, and how are you going to grow from it? So I'm blessed about that,
Yeah, I would show up to the little studio, and I was just like, man, like, what am I doing here? John's really not showing up anymore. I'm like this dude trapped. Meanwhile, I had a neighbor that was like, she did like a lot of sales calls, and she just spoke on speakerphone. I remember I would have to go over there and be like, hey, like, can you put some headphones in? So I'm sitting here in this space trying to make it work. Again, trying to be like, oh, I have a studio, I'm successful. Like, I need to be in the studio to hold that name, And then like, yeah, there was that light bulb moment where I was like, I'm getting out of here. Like, we got to get out of here. This is a waste of money. And so again, we both moved out and started working remotely. And then COVID really hits. The lockdowns were extreme, where people are hoarding groceries. Like, this was like the peak of it. And we're like, man, we're out of there. Granted, we had to pay. That's just cost of doing business. And that's a lesson we learned is, having a studio, you have overhead and you kind of feel pressed. Like, no matter what, if you don't have a gig, there's an expense you have to pay. Now, depending on what you're, being charged and what you're making, it's like that expense goes to that first, and then you start seeing profits, right? So I think us working remotely, it really like got us to today. Like we have it down. I almost like, it's hard to go back into friends' studios, and we have friends that are in Bridgeport and all over Chicago that have spaces, and when we go back, like we're like, man, like we miss this. You have the homies, you got the espresso machine, you got the lounge, then you got an area to shoot, and it's dim and dark lit. Like, we're like, man, we miss this. But then something kind of pulls us back, and it's like, well, we've gained a lot by working remotely, and I think a lot of it tied our business relationship together. Like, our communication improved so much. Like because we weren't seeing each other. So guess what? We had to hop on a call, started doing the whole Google Hangouts and Zoom. What would you say, like, like the transition? And obviously, yeah, you were having a baby, so like you were in a whole different headspace. Like, it was just hard to guilt you, because it's like, yo, I started understanding and having empathy of like, you have a lot going on. COVID's hitting. What am I doing in this studio? I got to get out of here. Like, I was just like, this is not serving me anymore. And I think being in the transition of just like studios working together and then like there's definitely, can you kind of talk about those first stages of working remotely? It was super new for us.
I mean, it was new for us, and it was new for a lot of people. And I think we transitioned pretty well. It just turned into, yeah, hey, in order for us to do this, you need to know your roles and your responsibility, and I need to know my roles and responsibilities. And we both had to hold ourselves accountable and each other accountable in order to make it happen. So you're remote, but yeah, you have things to do, and I have cribs to build, and I have beds to make, and I have, things to prep for. So we may not be on the same working hour, but as long as the work gets done, that's really what it came down to. Hey, if you wanted to wake up and go on a walk, with your partner, but I'm been up since 6:30, I'm not any better than you, because you like to work later in the day and I like to work, early in the day, because we have just different lives. And so I think that helped me understand Vince, and Vince helped understand me. And at the end of it, I had some things on my plate. Hey, I have this proposal. Well, it doesn't have to get done at 8 a.m. I told the client, and then, getting boundary with the client, hey, this sounds great. I'll get it to you by the end of the week, or I'll get it. And so, like, as long as you're delivering and keeping to your word, that helped big time. But then also, implementing, hey, we're going to be doing weekly meetings, like we put it in the Google Calendar. And at first it was tough, because we used to see each other every day, and every day was a meeting. And so, really locking down that time. Hey, can you slot in an hour for me on Tuesday? And then, we both say, hey, okay, this is the time that we're meeting. And then we go through it. Okay, what are you going to work on this week? This is what I'm working on this week. And then it was, okay, divide and conquer.
Looking back at all the spaces, and we had blasts, we have holiday parties, and we met a lot of people and we networked, but like, it's almost like you snap your finger and blink, and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm just like back in this apartment bedroom, kind of like from where we started. You're like in a corridor of your entryway. Oh, yeah. But it was interesting, because it's like, it made us think like, you don't need all that stuff all the time. All we really need, I mean, and everyone has different opinions on it, but for us, it's like in video production, right? You need, if you're doing the editing, right, you need a workstation, right, with a desk. And then if you have gear, somewhere to store it. But some people would rent all their gear. So let's just talk about a desk setup, right? So like, I had this moment where I would blink, and even being that 2,000 square foot space, I remember we would go in the corner and say, I literally just need this. And then you look left and you would just see the horizon of it. You're like, oh my God. Yeah. And so, again, just full circle moment. I think the key takeaways as we kind of wrap this episode up is, do you need a studio space to be successful, to be this super on a company? I don't think so. Is it nice to have? 100%. If you want to pay the overhead and you foster community, you need to work with people. By all means, very successful companies have spaces. It's normal to have an office. But is it the end all be all? No.
Well, to jump in there, I think if let's keep this centered on our business, video production. Like what you were saying, we have 3 steps. We have pre-production, which can be done remotely. Especially through COVID, a lot of people are comfortable having meetings now. They don't have to be face to face. Don't have to come in. You have to wine and dine them. Let's just, I'm in my pajamas. Let's have a talk. Everyone's in their pajamas these days. It's crazy.
Our button-up tie with the pajamas below.
That's it. So you have that, and then you have your editing where typically you want some space. Now, when it comes to production, our office is every location that we go to. So we go to a concert venue. Well, that is our office. We go to a corporate office to film. That is our office for the day. And so for us, that's the model. But if you're working in a huge logistics company and you have all these different managers and stuff, and you have to hold people accountable, that's a different story. But when it comes to just, our style of business, I think that having, I think we can do it and other creatives can do it just like the way we're doing it. Just depends on where you do the majority of your work.
And just overall the discipline and the accountability. I think it's something we really, if you don't have discipline and you can't hold people accountable, then working in a space can work. But just want to thank everyone for tuning in. Yeah, that was definitely a lot. I mean, we've journeyed Chicago a good amount to the point where we're now kind of grounded in working remote. And I honestly, although like could we get a space? Yeah, there's definitely places that are affordable where we're at now. But I think it comes back to just like we blink and we realize we've been doing it without it, and it kind of opens your eyes like, why don't we just hone in on other parts of the business and not get distracted? So thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully you gain some just insight on just studio spaces and our experience. And we'll catch you on the next episode.